can go ahead and get started.
Excellent. Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. First and foremost, thank you all for joining us, all these beautiful military veterans in journalism. I'm so glad to be here today, especially for this iteration, August iteration of the 2025 Journalist Development Series on how to cover sexual assault. So thank you all so much for being in attendance. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Therese Garnier. I'm a freelance journalist. I was a national news correspondent, and I was also a broadcast journalist in the Air Force. So once I got out of the Air Force, I became a national news correspondent, traveled all over the world. And in 2022, I got out of the news. I still freelance, but I published a book and became a huge advocate for sexual assault survivors. And so that's why I'm so honored to be here today and introduce you to a phenomenal woman who has boots on the ground trying to change legislation and do different things to help sexual assault survivors. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you all Miss Jean Payne. Now, Jean Payne is a Navy veteran. She's a corporate executive and a survivor who has turned her journey of overcoming trauma into a mission of advocacy and change. Now, she was raised in both Colombia and the US, and she's overcome childhood abuse and military sexual trauma, building a 20-year career in corporate leadership focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. Love it. She is the founder and CEO of TI Verbatim Consulting, which supports federal and commercial clients with organizational development and cultural change while using tools including a proprietary AI program. That's some cool stuff right there. Jean is the best-selling author of Reclaim Your Worth and recently championed Virginia legislation to establish an independent sexual offense response program for the state's military affairs department. Thank you for that. As a speaker, coach, and a nonprofit leader, Jean empowers others, especially women, to reclaim their worth and define success on their own terms. So please, all join me in giving her a warm welcome. Here we have Miss Jean Payne. How are you today?
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here. I am doing fantastic. Just very excited to be able to share my story.
Absolutely. So let's jump right on in. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you would like people to know about you.
Mm. I am a survivor. I was born in the U.S. and I was raised in Colombia, South America. I was sexually abused since the time I was 5 years old until I was 15, and ended up joining the military. And I wasn't so lucky. I was sexually abused over 20 times in the manner of assault, abuse, and harassment. After that, I had an amazing corporate career. I did a really good job hiding my pain from everybody who loved me. And so I'm a survivor and I'm here to share my story. Thank you.
So often survivors have these traumatic things happen to them and they feel the shame as if it's their fault and they end up burying it and hiding it and then suffering in silence. And so I'm so glad that you're coming forward and speaking and sharing your story, because this will be an encouragement to others that they don't need to suffer in silence and that they can share their story to heal. What would you say that some of your experiences as a survivor, how has that shaped the way that you think sexual assault should be covered in the military, excuse me, covered in the media?
Mm, that is a really good question. I was for I didn't really understand the impact of my sexual abuse, my childhood sexual abuse, until I left the military. But even then, it is very different to be a survivor versus being a bystander. It was very different to see everything in the news, but when you're directly impacted, it truly it truly hits home. And so for me, it has given me a different perspective in how it should be handled. I really think that for for us survivors, we want the stories to be covered in a very unbiased manner, and also feel that there should be no room in the media when we're talking about sexual abuse. There should be no politics, and everybody deserves to have their story heard. Many times I see just some stories get the huge highlights, but then other stories don't even make the media. So I have learned just to really kind of step back and really try to understand why sexual abuse is covered so inconsistently across the mainstream media.
Mm. And what have you discovered? What are some of the factors that you think play into why certain stories are covered and why others aren't?
I think it becomes because uh, politics get in the way of reporting some of the news. I would give you an example. When I was really pushing hard for House Bill 2520 in Virginia, it got the politics between what the General Assembly was doing and who the leader of the Virginia Commonwealth is, because there was so much just no alignment with the common themes. It didn't matter how much I pushed for that message to make it across the media. It never did. What I learned, it really came down to the foundation and the disagreement of the main institutions.
Mm. And so, what would be your advice to those individuals or even just journalists that are covering this? How can they adequately make sure they're covering it without a bias? Because I'm a journalist myself, and we always aim not to have a bias. However, factors come into play, and certain things get covered in certain ways, even when we are getting rid of all biases. It can still
Mhm.
snap one way or another where it looks like there's a bias. So, what would be the advice that you would give journalists to try to alleviate that and report on it as fairly as possible?
I think try to understand the story of the victims. Um, we didn't ask to be in the media. Um, we didn't ask for a story, for us to become a story. But I truly believe that if if the journalists can become an advocate to understand where the victims are coming from and why they might be vocal, why they may be raising their voice, I think they will probably have a different perspective of the true feeling of the victims. So I think it really comes down to meeting the victims where they are, understanding their story, understanding their background, and then taking a position in how they want to tell the story.
Hmm. So, coming to it with empathy.
Yes, yes.
I know when I used to do stories and have to interview other survivors, I would always start off with saying, I'm a survivor myself. And so I might not understand every aspect of what you went through, but I understand what you're facing now. And
Mhm.
so you're free to share what you like, whatever you don't feel comfortable with. Please let me know. I'm not going to push you to ask any questions you don't feel comfortable with. And I noticed that a lot of survivors instantly, they let their guard down, they let their armor down because they said, someone that gets me, someone that sees me. And I think
Mhm.
that's a key part of it too. Survivors just want to be seen. They just want to be understood. They want to be heard and not feel like they're being judged or blamed. And so what you just pointed out, having that empathy can tie into that. Just seeing them as a human and that they're going through a very painful experience can definitely help with that. So thank you so much for sharing that. Um, Another thing, what are some of the best practices that journalists can do to help build that trust with survivors? I kind of mentioned a couple of things that I like to say to others, but from your perspective, what is some things that you think that journalists should say or do to build that trust before they actually do the interview or the story?
I say do your homework. Don't make assumptions. Um, Part of my story of being the recipient of 20 plus incidents of sexual abuse, assault, harassment, it was alcohol.
Mm.
Alcohol was involved in pretty much every single incident. I was giving alcohol by superiors. They used their positions to abuse and assault me. And sometimes people may assume that, well, I asked for it. If you knew that alcohol was part of, could cause that, why did you agree to drink that shot of tequila? Why did you agree to do this? And people don't understand that when it comes to sexual abuse victims, we're powerless.
Mm.
And I understand where we are, meeting us where we have been and where we are today, and to establish that trust and not make assumptions is a great beginning and a great foundation to just start a good discussion about my story.
Mm. Absolutely. And I think a part of making those assumptions are the way you frame your questions, the way a journalist
Yes.
would frame their questions. Um, I've had instances where I was going to the Pentagon to get a medal for the work I did with sexual assault survivors. And the first thing that came out of one of the general's mouth was, well, why didn't you call 911? Why didn't
Yes.
you report it immediately? And instantly the PR person that was with me shut it down and said, "You're accusing her. That's inappropriate." And that was the PR, the person who was supposed to be awarding me. And so I think what ties into that as well is how journalists frame their questions to make sure that they're not accusatory. And a lot of times the way they ask questions, they don't see it as accusatory unless they're someone who's gone through it. And so I think that could also tie into it. So is there any examples of maybe ways that journalists can frame their questions where it comes off as they're asking you versus asking you a question, but it's coming off as them accusing you?
An interview can be a trigger for a path of self-destruction after the interview.
Mhm.
I like to almost put it in the same bucket as, I don't know if you have been through this, but the CMP exams, when you go to the VA examination, where sometimes you almost feel like you're being treated as defender or as somebody who caused the event. And I am, one of the things I do coaching. And the best part the best way to interview a person who is a survivor is, one is meet them where they are,
Mhm.
meet them where they are that day, and try open-ended questions. There's nothing more alienating, and just it puts me in a very bad place is when you start getting asked of, well, did you do this? Did you do that? Why not? So always like to say, ask open-ended questions. Tell me more about this. Well, how did you feel about that? What is something that you could do? How would you go about that? And you're going to get more out of me with those questions. They're putting me in a position that I have to be a yes or no answer.
That's a very good example. Thank you. And I couldn't agree more. I try to tell journalists, like, with, because I teach some courses on this as well. When you ask questions, you need to broaden them out. And if they want to go into more details, great, but it's your job as a journalist to find those other details in case they don't want to speak on those. And that could be something you can track later on versus putting you through the trauma of doing that.
Mhm.
Also, if you could give any advice to journalists covering sexual assault in the military, what would that advice be?
Generalists are in a position of, I would say, when it comes to reporting stories, especially this kind of stories, they're in a position of privilege because they're being given access to certain environments that nobody's privy of. So I would say use, even though I'm here to tell you is we want an unbiased approach, but I think there's ways how you can also become an advocate without taking sides, by just, not making assumptions,
Mhm.
not making assumptions how I show up. Maybe not taking sides, reporting the facts,
Mhm.
using the platform to give a voice to those who have never had one. I didn't ask to be abused. I didn't ask to be assaulted. But it just happened to me that I was in a place where I was not protected.
Mhm. And that's, I think that's one of the things that people need to understand, that unfortunately, with the way um, the environment that we're in, it's seen as even though you're the victim, you brought it upon yourself. I mean, I've been so baffled. I'm a news reporter, and how many stories that I've done where someone's house will start on fire and they're like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" Like, did you save all your stuff in your house? And that's the first question people ask. But if I talk to a survivor, they go, were they at a party? Were they drunk? Were they drinking? Why were they walking down the alley by themselves? All those questions are accusing, but you won't ask somebody that just got robbed, why were you walking down the alley at night with a full wallet full of money in your pocket when you got mugged? No one asks that. But if you're a survivor, that's the first questions that come to mind. And so I think it's also an idea of changing people's perspectives on how they view it. This should not be a political issue. I don't care who you are, sexual assault should never be acceptable in any circumstance, and so I think changing that perception of, if this happened, she's lying, or she asked for it, she brought it upon herself. I think that also goes into trying to change people's minds on how they view that aspect. And so I wanted to ask you, what is your thoughts and opinion on that, and trying to kind of change people's perceptions of when someone is traumatized in such a manner?
I think the mentality when, as a victim, I'm daily faced with the question in my head, did I cause the assault? Did I cause the abuse? I had the alcohol. I did this. I carry a lot of, and I'm still navigating through my trauma. As victims, I'm navigating a sense of guiltness when it comes to the abuse. And we don't need to be reminded of what we could have done to prevent it. And 4 men, 5 women daily are abused in the military. Numbers are underreported by 2 to 4 times. When I took the leap of faith to become a loud voice for the Virginia House bill in Virginia, I was attacked. I was attacked politically because somehow I had a political agenda. My values were questioned. And it felt that nobody cared about why we needed change. So like I said, when we speak up, one is because for me, I want change. I want nobody else to go through what I went through. But I'm doing it because I want change, not because I want to become a political figure. And I think that's where things get lost, is that the messaging gets lost, and then it gets diluted, and somehow people do start taking sides of why you're speaking up.
When after your assault happened, what was the catalyst that made you say, I have to start speaking up about this? Because everyone's journey is different when they decide they want to come forward and share their story. And so what was the catalyst? Was the one thing that made you say, I have to start sharing my story because I want to help other people?
It happened December of 2022. I served in the military from 1992 to 1996. I was literally abused from the moment I got out of boot camp. I was not protected by my superiors. I was ostracized, and I was viewed as a troublemaker. I left the military, and after 20 years of living in silence, because nobody knew what I was going through mentally, I was going through depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. And literally, it was not until December of 2022 where I decided to reclaim my worth. And that's why I named my book Reclaim Your Worth, because I needed to live. And it was in December 2022 when I decided that I was going to live or die. And at that moment is when I said, I'm going to get the help that I need. I'm no longer going to be ashamed of having a psychiatrist, a psychologist or take the medicine that I need to take daily to get better. So at that moment when I knew that I could tell my story is when I was no longer afraid to speak up and tell my story. At that moment, I said, enough. If I can change one life, if I can just save one soul, I'm going to do that.
And what would you say your journey has been like since you made that beautiful decision to not only help yourself, but also help others in the process? What has that journey been like for you?
It has been liberating, but also I have learned that recovering mentally and physically from sexual abuse is a marathon. Every day is full of zigzags. I never know what next day is going to bring. And I have learned to meet myself where I'm at every day. And instead of looking in the mirror and thinking of all the imperfections that I can find, I try to praise and not judge anymore.
That's taking that power back. That's taking your power
Yes.
back. And
Yes.
and you mentioned earlier that you wrote a whole book about reclaiming your worth. It's called Reclaim Your Worth. So tell us a little bit about your book and what the motivation was for writing it, and maybe the healing that you've developed from it, and some of the things that you share with others on how they can heal if they experience different types of trauma.
So from 1996 until probably around 2016, I lived, like I said, secretly battling all my demons. But then I decided to get help. But there are many times when we say verbally that we're going to get help, but we don't do our work. So I did like most people do. Okay, well, I'm going through my VA process. Yes, I got to sign a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a therapist, and I'm doing all this stuff, but I was not doing my part. I was literally fooling everybody around me. Even my own family. They thought I was getting help, but I was not doing my homework. None of the tools, none of the stuff that my psychologists or therapists were giving me. But I was blaming people for not getting better. It was your fault that I'm not getting better. I'm doing all this stuff. What else can I do? But it wasn't literally until December of 2022 when I made that pledge to myself. And then that's when I decided I am going to reclaim my worth. And that means me taking ownership of my own journey, because there's nobody around me can fix me. Nobody around me can heal me. It's mine to take on that journey. And so when I decided that moment that I was going to take ownership and stop relying on people to reclaim my worth, that was the moment that everything happened. So it's really realizing that it was for me to own that journey and for me to get better. The moment that I did that, then I knew exactly what I needed to do. I started taking my psychiatrist appointments seriously, my psychologist. I started getting, looking for cheerleaders and protectors. And then also, started thinking about what I was putting in my body was affecting how I was healing.
And so is this what your book goes into? Tell us a little bit about what your book dives into, and I guess the process of you writing that. And I think you have a copy. I would love for everyone to see a copy of your book. And she's come out with 3, so I'll let you.
Yes.
I don't want to steal thunder, but tell us a little bit more about that.
So when I realized that I was ready to heal, which was December of 2022, I took 2023 to really work on myself. At the end of 2023 into 24, I was ready to tell my story. And I was no longer afraid. I talked to my family. I said, I need to do this for myself. And by the details that are going to be in that book, they're going to be a lot of raw details. And I need your support. Because I have a 15-year-old son. And I have their full support because my son has seen me with my physical, pain, not being able to get up and down the stairs because I suffer now from fibromyalgia, which many PTSD, military sexual trauma survivors. So what the book does is, so in December of 2020, 23 into 2024, I hunkered down for 4 weeks. I wrote my book in 4 weeks, wow. 35,000 in 3 weeks, and then 15,000 in 1 week. And it really, what it does is I was able to put everything down on paper, which was very healing. But at the same time, I was able to show people different ways how we can do some self-reflection. You know, I talk about it. I'm really, really purposeful when I talk about. One of my biggest things was when I looked in the mirror, what I saw was a broken woman. Somebody who could not be fixed. Somebody who was worthless. So for me to be able to stand in the mirror, and I do this every day, regardless of the makeup, regardless of whatever I have, but being able to praise myself and being able to praise who I see and not judge. Meeting myself where I'm at is one of the other things. The other thing is I cleaned up my circle. Cleaning up my circle, creating cheerleaders and protectors who would always have my back. And so part of the journey, it was really kind of understand those trigger points for me to heal. Changing the way how I treated my body. You know, who knew? I started doing yoga and Pilates. I've been doing that for 1.5 years, building a community. So what I would say is that healing, there's just not one solution. To me, it's a puzzle, right? I have a puzzle. And I need every single one of those pieces in the right place to be able to heal. So that's kind of what my book does. It takes the reader through a journey of all of us have imperfections, but it's on us to deal with those imperfections, but also to be able to reclaim our worth in our own terms.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Now, I also know that you wrote a child's book, a children's book.
Yes.
So tell us about the inspiration for writing this children's book and what the book goes into as well.
So part of my whole thing about reclaiming my worth, I feel that it happens in every stage of your life. What we don't realize is that things that happen while we're growing up, it will shape who we become as human, as adults. You know, I remember when I was 5 years old and somebody making fun of one of my body parts, right? Or I remember when I was 16 years old, my aunt telling me that if you keep eating that way, you're gonna get thunder thighs. That was the beginning of a 3 or 4 year eating disorder, right? And so there's so many things that happen, and I felt that my book was, like you were saying, it was a little bit too raw for for a child or for a young adult to read it. So what I did is to create. I'm creating books for every stages of their life. So I had this one here, which is for adults. I decided to release it in Spanish, but also part of the children's pieces because I feel that you can lose your worth at a very early age in your life, and that it will just a small comment will shape who you become. I'm also getting ready to release another one later on this fall, and it's all about young adults. How can you protect yourself from losing your worth? And that's gonna be called Unconditionally Worthy.
I love that. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to it. I already told you I have one of your books in my shopping cart. I'm about to put the children's book in there too, so I can gift that to some folks. And it's so important that you've come forward and spoken to all these journalists here so they can know how they can cover it. But also too, just kind of switching it from a different angle. There are probably journalists here who have gone through this, who are suffering in silence, who don't want to talk about it. I was one of those journalists who experienced it and didn't want to talk about it because I was fearful for what could happen with my job or how my coworkers would judge me. What would be some advice that you would give to journalists themselves if they find themselves in this kind of situation, whether it's they were assaulted by a coworker or someone while on a story, or they were impacted as children and they haven't kind of
Mm.
dealt with that? What would be your advice to them?
So one thing to acknowledge is that sexual abuse, it happens to men and women. There's just a stigma and this stereotype that somehow is just happens to women. One of my loved ones, who is a military male veteran, they were sexually assaulted in the military at a very young age. And so I would tell anybody who has gone through any type of abuse, assault, or harassment is that they're not alone and that they're stronger than they think they are. And to never be ashamed to tell your story. Because just one of what you perceive yourself as an imperfection is something that you can use to change somebody's life. So I'm just saying, don't be ashamed to tell your story. Don't be ashamed to say, I am, and get the help that you need. Because it is the only way how you're going to heal.
I couldn't agree more. I'm gonna make a little peg on when I published my book, I had a lot of men purchasing it and they were coming forward and sharing stories. Like I had a 80-year-old veteran, Army veteran, a man who was gang raped trying to protect a female soldier that a bunch of guys were trying to rape. And he was trying to protect her. And they said, if you don't get out of the way, we're going to do to you what we're going to do to her. And he said no. And they pinned him down and raped both of them. He's now 80 years old and he's lived with that since he was 20.
Mhm.
And I was the first person he had shared that with. And he said, it's because I saw your book and it made me feel comfortable enough to come forward about what's happened to me. And now I can start healing. And people don't realize the impact that you can have just by sharing your story with others.
Yes.
I never
Yes.
thought an 80-year-old man was going to contact me and tell me something so horrendous, but now he's starting to feel like he's just starting to live life because he
Yeah.
doesn't get that fear. He's not suffering in silence. And so that's why it's so important for these stories to be told and for the people who are tell them to feel safe enough to tell the stories. That's
One of the things that happened to me is the sense of betrayal comes from different places. For me, it came from the military. I was not protected. I spoke up, and I was sent to alcohol rehab. I woke up in hospitals with bruises in my arms, bruises in my inner thighs. Instead of protecting me, again, I got in trouble. After reporting and speaking up 6 or 7 times, I just stopped. And so the betrayal, like I said, it came from different places. One came from the military, but two also came from my own father. When I spoke up, he asked me what had I done to deserve what happened to me.
Mm.
And so I was really ashamed of everything that I've been through. But also I realized that I was being selfish by not sharing my story.
Mm.
And when I started talking about my story, people started reading my book. I still get messages on Facebook. Thank you. Because of you, I'm able to do this now. Because of you, I'm able to do that. So you never know how many people you're impacting until you tell your story. But you have to be ready.
That part, that part. And part of being ready, I want to say this, is starting your own healing journey first, because I've had survivors coming to me and they're like, I want to do what you're doing. And I'm like, okay, but have you, and they're like, no, I'm like, no, like work on
Yes.
healing yourself first, because when you start first, you need to be able to deal with your own trauma, because now all of a sudden you have a bunch of people dumping their trauma on you and you still
Yes.
have to deal with your own, you know? And
Yes. Yes.
so I'm like, Look, I'm a big proponent and an advocate
Yeah.
for counseling. I will go to counseling for the rest of my life. I say, please get into counseling. Discuss this with your counselor. They can kind of
Mhm.
gauge whether they think you're ready to start trying to help others or whether you still need to deep dive into your own traumas. And so I always tell people that, like, I know you're excited, you feel liberated, but also you got a lot of healing to do. And I tell people, don't set a time limit on when you expect to be healed, right?
Mhm.
Some people it could take
Mhm.
a couple years, others it could take a lifetime. So give yourself grace and know that you're healing at your own pace, and when you're ready, you will know. But to your point, you know, people get excited. They're like, I want to do this. I'm like, wait, make sure you got your healing first, because we don't want to traumatize you worse, and then you're worse off because you hadn't healed yourself to begin with. You know, so that's usually when I get that question too. So I mean, we're kindred spirits. I just love it. By the way, folks that have been on this call, you didn't see earlier today when she joined, we were literally wearing the same clothes, and it was not planned whatsoever. So I feel like I'm talking to a sister here. But on that note, though, I am going to ask, is there anything else you'd like to add? And then I'm going to open it up for others that may have some questions as well. So is there anything else you'd like to add?
I just want to say thank you. Thank you for giving me the space to share my story. I want to, thank every single journalist here for being here today, and I'm thankful for for your support and getting the story up there and how to protect men and women from sexual abuse. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
And also tell us where everyone can find your books.
You can go to reclaimyourworthnow.com or you can go to amazon.com.
Excellent, excellent. So I'm gonna open the floor up to anyone who would like to ask some questions. Also, Jean, just know that if there's anything that you're asked that you don't feel comfortable with answering, you can say I pass or I don't feel comfortable answering that. Don't feel any pressure to have to answer things that, if you don't feel comfortable with it. But on that note, does anyone have any questions you would like to follow up with? I see Jerry. Jerry, you were the first hand that popped up. So come on, unmute yourself and what do you have for her?
Hi, Jean. Thanks so much for sharing your story. And it's important just as much for you as it is for people to hear you, to know what you've gone through. I have an organization called End Veteran Debt. And as a 501c3 charitable foundation, we're going to be putting on a micro summit on veteran mental health and finances on September 9th of this
Mm.
year. Where are you located physically?
I'm in Florida.
A hop, skip, and a jump. We're going to be having this, and I'd like to put my website and my email address in chat and have you get in touch with me. We'd love to have you speak, whether it be personally or on a Zoom. We need to get your story out there.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Hmm.
Mm.
And by the way, a major theme within this one-day micro summit is whistleblowing and its importance.
Yes. Very important.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Does anyone else have questions? Megan, I see you just put your hand up. What's your question?
Hi. Yeah. And I wanted to just say thank you so much for coming and speaking with us as well, and for all your advocacy work. It, I think, takes such incredible courage to do that. Um, and I myself am also a MST survivor from my time in the Air Force. So yeah, I just kind of connected to that part of your story when I saw that you were going to be speaking. Um, and now I'm a journalist with Wired and a senior research editor there. And I've worked on several stories over the years about sexual assault and harassment. And some of that work has been kind of, in a way healing to be able to help tell other people's stories. But I guess one thing that always kind of is difficult to do is when we have to go and kind of do the fact checking portion of these stories. And sometimes we have to, reach out to the people who are the aggressors in the situation and like verify those parts of the story. And that always feels like a really tricky subject to bring up with people who are sharing such a difficult part of their life. So I wonder if you, yourself have any insight or tips, or just like how you would feel about a journalist coming to you and needing to verify those things? Like, how would you want to be
Mm.
informed of that, or
Mm.
broach the subject with?
I have been watching the Netflix docuseries, documentaries, how they're doing the short documentaries, and they interview different players, and it's very terrifying because every instance, and with my story is um, it was my story that I lived. I spoke up a couple of times, and I was betrayed by the system. And so when you start mentioning names, the common theme or the immediate thing is people are going to deny it. So you're left having to defend yourself. One of my biggest fears, because I was giving alcohol by people in positions of authority. People in positions of authority would ask me to go to dark alleys so I could touch their privates. Okay, there's people who have made it very high into the military ranks. Okay, and so when you start thinking about, for example, all the alcohol that I was giving, all the situations that I was put into with people in positions of authority, one of my biggest fears is that when people are interviewed, what are they going to say? Well, she was getting drunk and she took the alcohol, and she was 18 years old and they were 40 years old, but nobody talks about the fact that she was 18 years old and this guy was 40 years old, right? So again, it's a very terrifying environment because people will try to discredit you. And it's something that you have to be ready for. That has been part of my book, is being ready to stand your ground and say, it happened to me. I'm not backing down. I am a victim. I didn't deserve it.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think that with these stories that the media can ever do like more harm than good? I think particularly of Christy Blasey Ford, who came forward against, when Brett Kavanaugh was nominated, and how she hadn't wanted to be, public. She wanted to be anonymous, and journalists kind of pushed on that door until it bust open and everyone found out who she was, and she was opened up to all sorts of abuse. So I sometimes struggle with like how much good can we do, and can we ever really cause a lot more damage?
I think from what I said, with the mental health journey that I have been through, I think sometimes I feel that almost like more harm can come out of this by speaking up. And when you take the position and when you decide, like you were saying, Terrence, when you decide that you want to tell your story, you have to be sure 100% that you're ready for the consequences, because there's always the good, the bad, and the ugly with a story. And while I have my version, other people will try to discredit your story. And so I think it's just being ready, being mentally and physically ready to stand your ground and say, yes, it happened to me. I'm ready to tell the story. I'm not going to back down. And I'm no longer afraid. I am no longer afraid.
And that takes strength. It takes a lot of strength, because sharing, a lot of people don't understand, you're sharing a very dark moment of something that happened to you for everyone to judge. I give a perfect example, the P. Diddy trials. That was so disappointing to me because they painted Cassie and his ex as prostitutes. So basically they were saying they deserved what happened to them because they were prostitutes.
Mm-hmm.
And that was so disheartening. They came forward because, not publicly, they were just, trying to get justice. And then everything that had happened became public. And then that videotape came out of him beating her up in a hotel, and then people still questioning it. And, oh, what did she do for him to do that? Is that ever acceptable for anyone? I don't care if it's a man beating another man or a man beating a woman or vice versa. Is that ever acceptable? And that situation came up, and now you're starting to see how cases like that are being covered. And those are famous people. Imagine people who aren't as famous and this kind of situation happens to them. That can strike fear into people and not want them to come forward, because they're like, well, look what happened to Cassie. She's a famous singer. And they said she's a prostitute and she basically deserved it with the verdict that they gave him. Why would anyone want to come forward after that? And so I think it's a fine balance of, yes, you still have to tell the story. The survivor has to be understanding and knowing of the consequences, that this could go great, this could go badly. But is that the sword you want to fall on? And for those that do come forward and speak and share their truth, they understand that this could be damaging to me, but that's okay as long as I can help someone else not suffer the way I did. And that's the mindset that a lot of survivors take when they come forward and speak on that. So Megan, thank you for being vulnerable and opening up and sharing about that experience. I'm so sorry that you went through that. I'm also a survivor of sexual assault in the Air Force, so I completely understand that whole situation and how the Air Force tends to handle those kinds of things. But I'm glad to see you here. I'm glad to see you surviving and thriving. And now you're sharing everybody else's stories at Wired. I think you said at Wired.
Yeah, that's right. At Wired. Mhm.
So
Yep.
you're blossoming, hun. So you keep. I'm glad you asked
Well,
that.
but it's also not just the impact. You talk about Megan, you talk about the impact and just in
Mhm.
general, it's the impact to your family.
Mhm.
That is also, I want to protect. And that, I think that's why it took me a little bit to decide, did I want to release a book? Because I wanted to protect my family. I wanted to protect my son. And so one of the conversations, some of the conversations that I have with my family is, this is what I'm going to do. This is what it's going to look like. They have seen my journey. They have seen my suffering. They have seen everything that I've been through. But I needed their support, because somebody will try to discredit your family. And things that people say do affect your family. So I think there's a bigger picture of not just yourself, but also what kind of attention does that bring to your family, and how does that affect your loved ones?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great point. Very great point. Do we have any other questions from some of our attendees?
Therese,
Sorry.
I just wanted to, oh, go ahead.
Are you sure? Okay, hi. Sorry I was off camera so much. I got my toddler here, so I'm on and off. My name's Andres. I'm also a SA survivor, although it was prior to the service. I was a 10-year Air Force veteran. And so this happened when I was a child, so it's something I'm trying to learn. But now I'm a journalist, and I'm really trying to find a beat. I'm a very early career journalist. So for the past 2 years, I've just been taking care of my toddler, basically. But just thank you all for sharing. I'm not sure how ready I am to share any of this, especially family dynamics. And you just mentioned that how that would affect the family mainly. So yeah, it's just something I'm trying to learn and understand a little bit better. So that's why I came into today's talk. So thank you all so much.
Can I make one comment on that? One, thank you for sharing that and opening up and sharing that with us. As important as it is to see how you coming forward could impact your family, at the end of the day, it's about your healing journey. It's about what helps you get through it and heal. I did not have family support when I came out about my stuff. As a matter of fact, like Jean, my dad blamed me and said, well, why were you out partying? I wasn't. I was at home unpacking. He was out partying and showed up at my room and barged in, and so I did not have that family support. And so I think it's important at the end of the day for you to do what's best for you and your healing journey, as well as you said you have a toddler. You're setting an example now for that toddler, what it's like to work on healing yourself after something you didn't ask for happened to you as a child. The people who were supposed to protect you, the adults that were supposed to protect you did not do that, but you're setting the example to your baby that I'm going to be there to protect you. And this is also how I protect myself so I can continue protecting you. So also do what you need to do that's going to heal you. And sometimes it's not going to go well with your family. My family, it didn't go well with them, but guess what? They jumped on after they saw how well my book did. Then they kind of jumped on and started supporting me more with it. So I think it's a fine balance of the pros and cons of doing that. But I think at the end of the day, the most important part is that you work on your healing journey and how you can get through that trauma. And that's just my perspective or my thoughts on that.
You know, Andres, being from Colombia, South America, with a Hispanic Latino culture, everything is a lot of taboo. You don't talk about it, but also part of my piece, which has been extremely difficult, is seeing people who abuse me, and they're thriving in the military in very high-ranking positions. And so, one of my things my husband has told me is that you can't. Part of your healing is to move on, and that focus on what everybody else is doing. And so that has been really, really hard for me, because I see how you hurt me, but you're thriving on your career. You know, I was messed up for 20-something years, and I'm still recovering, but then they're enjoying life, a very successful life. So, but I have been able to really heal in a way that, you know what, I have to move on. I have to heal. I have to own my own journey. I have to speak up. I have to be an advocate, and I can't live my life on what everybody else did to me. And that has been really hard for me to overcome.
And Jean, me and you had briefly said this earlier, there's different ways that survivors can help. One way could just be going through your own healing journey. Don't be part of the statistic of survivors who go the dark route and they end up unaliving themselves because of everything. Be that survivor that thrives afterwards. You're contributing just in healing yourself. And then if you decide to take it a step further and you want to speak to others and help them on their healing journeys, even better. But just you talking about it right now, just you saying, you know, I may not be ready to talk about it with my family and stuff, but but you're open about it. You're already contributing. And that's what we just need people to understand. There's so many different ways to be able to heal and contribute to help other survivors just by helping yourself. So I encourage you to do that. And again, thank you for sharing that with us, because that takes a lot of courage. And just know you got a whole tribe right here who's ready to support you. And I'm gonna put my contact info in the chat too. So if anyone wants to reach out to me, I know Jean, you're probably gonna share your contact info as well. Please reach out to us, because that's what we're here to do, to help survivors get through this. So anyone else have questions?
I was just going to say on Megan's point that she made, I started a story that I was writing, and I didn't know that it was like, she hadn't intended to share that the reason that all of this other stuff happened to her was because she was sexually assaulted. And so I didn't know that I was gonna have to be writing a story about that until I was. And then I had to face the question from the editor, well, did they report it? Is there going to be court documents? Because we can't publish it otherwise. And I don't think I've fumbled over a question more than asking her if there's proof. Because, and I think that she might have been asked before, but for me, I was like, I don't want to ask this. I don't want to question her. I don't want to put her in that position. Luckily, I think she could tell and she was able to help me, but yeah, sometimes you don't even know that that's what you're going to be writing about, but it's important that you handle it sensitively and gracefully and definitely tell the story.
I think in that instance, because I've had to do stories with survivors and I've had to go ask that question. And there's been instances where if a survivor's already coming forward, they understand that they're going to have to probably answer some questions that they're going to be a little bit uncomfortable with. At least in my experience, that's happened. And so I would ask, hey, I'm a journalist. I have to be unbiased in this. If you're making an allegation, I have to go talk to the other party and let them share their side of the story, period. That's just how journalism works. I can't just show one side. That being said, what evidence do you have? Do you have screenshots? Do you have emails? Do you have photos? Anything you can share to make your case. I need that. And that's how I frame it. Like, this is to help you make your case if you have those things. And then when I go to the other person, the same question. What is the stuff that you have to make your case that whatever, it didn't happen and whatever. And then my job at that point is to present all the facts. I cannot be biased. I cannot say he definitely raped her, right? That's not for me to do. It's for me to say, this is what was filed in the courts. This is what she's saying. This is what he's saying. You decide what you think. And I think when you frame it that way, when you go to interview people, they will be more open and understanding that you're not attacking me. You're not questioning whether I'm lying or not. You are literally making sure that you have every piece of evidence that you need for both sides, so that way you can present a valid argument as to this is why this became a case and this is why it's being addressed in the courts. So I think if you bring it and approach survivors that way, there's no way they can ever take offense to it, because they'll understand that you're doing it to help them and help the story, not trigger them or question their honesty.
I always also, if I had to look back and somebody would ask me, what would you do differently? I would say, retain all the evidence. I remember when I was the first time that it happened, I was 18 years old, and they harasser, assaulter, he wrote me a letter, because I went and told my supervisor. My supervisor says, well, I can't keep this private. I'm going to have to speak up. So they went to the commanding officer. He ended up going to what is called XOI. I don't know if you're all familiar with XOI, which is the executive officer investigation before it goes to captain's mass. And he went there, and he accepted that he had unzipped his pants. That was the kind of like the most that he would accept, is that he had unzipped his pants, and he got away with it. He got away with it. He was given some hours of community service at the MWR in the base. But he wrote me a letter, I think an apology letter. That was kind of what he was supposed to do. And I was so angry. I was so ready to move on, that I destroyed it. And I was thinking, like, man, if I could go back with some of the instances of just the artifacts that I could have saved, I would have saved them. That's what I would tell people who are going through this. It's like, save everything, because you don't know what your story is going to look like in 20 years when you want to tell the story, and you have to prove that you're not lying. So it becomes very difficult, because you're in your heart, I know what happened to me. I know exactly what happened to me. I know how it went down. But then when you have to, go down the path of like saying exactly and starting to name names, I think it becomes a whole different thing.
Also, you just hit the nail on the head. You said that you were trying to move on. That's why you destroyed it. That's the hard part. One, when you're being assaulted, you're not thinking, let me keep the evidence from this in case I decide to report it. You're not thinking that. And then even if after the fact that you do decide to keep it, now you have to hold on to that. Now you're constantly being reminded of what happened to you, and you got it sitting in the corner of your room. And so it's a lot of things that play into that, but it is so important to do that. Just understand that as a survivor, if you do that, you will be constantly reminded. If you go through the reporting process, you will be constantly reminded every day about what happened to you. You will have to talk about it hundreds of times. You will be interviewed. You will have people question your sex life and your party life and your parenting life, and they will dissect every aspect of your life. And I promise you, for people that say people like to lie and make it up for attention, nobody wants that. No one wants their entire life dissected in front of a bunch of strangers. No one, unless they're really crazy. And you got a couple people that's sometimes crazy and they do stupid stuff like that. But the horror that we have to go through when we report it to get it to court, and then the court process, it's mortifying. Honestly, it almost killed me. I'm gonna be honest. Thank God I did it. But it's a lot to go through. So it is important, if you want to make it easier for these cases to be more cut dry, the more evidence you have, the better. But you do risk that you will be reminded about it constantly because you're holding on to those things. But it is important to do it. Regardless, it's very important to do it. So thank you, Jean, for saying that. I just want to make sure that people understand that there's also some repercussions that come with that too, good and bad. So, but it's very important. Is it, does anyone else have any questions or comments, or? I can't see everyone on here. It's only, I only see 3 people on here, so I can't see everyone that's on the call. But do we have anyone, I think you said you were streaming this as well. Do we have anyone on the stream that might be typing any questions?
I have not seen any questions, but I know that you said that you had big things that you're dealing with tomorrow, and I didn't want to keep you past 6 here, or past I'm sorry, we're on Eastern time, past 7.
Oh yeah, no, I'm good till 7:30, so I'm good. So I'm here for Jean. I want her to get her story out, and any questions that people have for her, I want to be able to give her time. So if no one else has questions though, Jean, can you tell us once again, show us your 3 books, let everyone know where they can find it, and then anything else that you would like to add before we close it up.
So I have the English version, which is Reclaim Your Worth. And then I have the Spanish version here, Recupera tu Valor. I thought it was so important for me. I was very passionate about having it in Spanish, just because most of my family lives in Colombia and they don't speak English. And so I wanted them to read it. But I also think one thing that I'm finding out is that people that are close to you, they don't want to read the book.
That part.
They do not want to read the book because one of my siblings, he's a judge in Colombia, and he deals with a lot of child abuse cases. And that's kind of one of the reasons too why I wrote Jean in the Magnificent Mirror, which is a children's book. But one of the things that he says, it goes back to the first question that you asked me about, where I answer that it's easier. I'm not saying it's easy. It's easier when you see the news and you're like, oh, somebody else's problem. Oh, somebody else is going through that. Oh, but then when it becomes you, it's a lot more difficult. So it has been extremely difficult for my husband and my brothers. They can't even open the book because to him it's like, I know what I deal with and I know what the news looks like, but it's a lot different when it hits home, when I know that it's my little sister going through it. But it was very important for me to release a Spanish version, just because I wanted my family to be able to read the story. Like I said, all my books are available on Amazon.com. I'm going to be releasing another one, which is called Unconditionally Worthy for young adults. And I'm just want to use every platform that I can just to speak up against sexual abuse, specifically about military sexual abuse, because I don't feel that the military is doing enough to protect men and women in the military, and that people who are speaking up, they're being ostracized, they're being persecuted, and they're treated as almost like a criminal. And I don't think that's fair. I think people who speak up, they should get justice. And so I think the military can do a better job when it comes to the reporting of military sexual abuses. Cases, commanding officers should not be delegating somebody within the command who's probably sometimes their friend to be investigating a sexual abuse case, because you know what happens when the friends and family start doing that, they're not going to get a fair trial. So I'm hoping that one is that it becomes more an independent office where the cases are taken outside the chain of command. That is how it's supposed to be. Part of my work is to have independent offices within the military, specifically at the state level. For example, in Virginia, the National Guard, I'm fighting really hard. Politics got in the way for 2025, and we're going back in 2026 because it needs to pass. And it has been passed in Texas, and every single state should have that. So that's kind of my big thing, is to ensuring that there's transparency in the chain of command and the men and women who have been entrusted to the government to be protected are protected when they join the military.
Where, if people want to reach out to you, can you share your contact info? If there's a website, social media, would you mind putting that in the chat for everyone? As well as if they want to get a signed copy of your book, how does that work?
Yes. So here I have my my address, and you can go to any kind of social media. I'm under Jean Ibáñez Payne.
Excellent. All right. And then also for you all, I'm trying to get that right now. I'm also going to share my contact info in the chat as well. That way, if anyone has any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm gonna post that in there as well. But I just want to thank you all so much for taking the time to one, let Jean come and share her phenomenal story and everything that she's done and all the beautiful things that she's planning on doing in the future. I'm so looking forward to seeing everything you do. Next time you're in the area, please let me know because I'm right up the street. So let's definitely connect. And then also, you know, for everyone that's here, you know, if you have any other further questions about how to report on these things, if you have stories that you're like, you know, how can I approach this? That's one of the things I definitely love helping with as well. And I'm located in the DC area. So for those who are in this area too, if you ever just want to link up, get coffee, any of those things, you know, please let me know. But I'm so thankful and honored to have been able to be here and moderate this. I think this is my, let's see if it works. This is my digital business card. So that has all my contact info there. And so thank you all for joining. And if you have any other questions, you can follow up with my email. Jean shared her information, and I hope you all have a great week. And thank you so much. Thank you for having me too.